dear listeners. This is the first episode in our Lord of the Rings read-through series. We'll be reading the three main books in the Lord of the Rings series, and we'll be releasing one episode on each. This is the first part of our fall semester season, and we might even record some more episodes. We'll see how it goes. With Lord of the Rings, there's always so much to talk about, and we really dig in deep in this episode. As you can see, this is the first part, covering a little bit of background on Tolkien, and then going up until the end of the first half of the Fellowship of the Ring. The next episode will cover the second half. And in this installment, we talk a lot about fantasy, how Tolkien uses lore to make his world seem more alive, as well as his background in philology and languages. And of course, we talk a little bit about the long shadow of World War I, as well as Loder's, I would say, theme of diminishment and of a greater world since gone by. So it's a really great episode. And like I said, this is just the first part. So we'll hope you listen to the second part when we release it. And we hope you enjoy the conversation.
And I definitely feel like our perspective is going to shift in advance as we go through the series, because Fellowship is like a very weird book in a lot of ways.
Oh yeah, definitely.
In a way that I feel like the other, I don't want to say they're not interesting or bad or something like that, but it's just they don't take 20-year interims to just be Frodo just kind of hung around for 20 years.
Yeah, or they stay in Rivendell a whole month, and someone was Bilbo's I never keep track of the days in Rivendell. So just chilling.
He's retired.
Yeah, retired Bilbo.
Wearing a Hawaiian shirt.
Yeah, coming up with songs about, I guess, Elrond's dad. Did you or maybe Elrond's grandfather? There's something in there that is one of those adults are talking jokes, or it's Aragorn's Elrond can't believe that you're making up a song about his forefathers in his own house or something, but it's a good song, so everyone's fine with it. But
it's gonna be kind of funny too, because it's Elrond's dad died 5,000 years ago. Presumably people have written a lot of songs about the fall of Gil-galad.
Right, yeah. And then Bilbo's just adding to that theme, and then Elrond's another one about my dad who died 5,000 years ago.
How about one about Elrond?
Yeah, and thanks to the movies, I just can't not imagine anyone but Hugo Weaving as Elrond with that that furrowed brow, just yeah. So
yeah, I don't necessarily want to get too into the movies. I did watch Fellowship this week just because I was why not?
Right.
I had a free night. What the heck?
Yeah.
Except I got 3 hours in, and for some reason, every time I try to keep watching, it crashes the HBO Max app on both my TVs.
So they don't want you to watch Lord of the Rings?
They don't want me to watch Lord of the Rings. I tried to even just skip and watch The Two Towers, but it won't do that either. Wow,
great. So much for digital libraries. Yeah, you should only own things on physical. Do not ever. Yeah, that's so weird. Yeah.
Honestly, I probably should just get them on Blu-ray at this point, but
that's frustrating, especially since if it's right before what it would have been the end,
basically it failed as soon as they left Lothlorien.
Oh man.
So I'm missing which it's kind of great. That's the last 40 pages of the book is after they leave Lothlorien, but it's the last hour of that movie.
Right. Yeah. Because that's what that is one thing about the movies is they definitely take their time, which is nice about the book.
Yeah. Except then they missed the most important part. Where's Tom?
Oh yeah, they took out
Where's Tom Bombadil?
Your friend and mine, Tom Bombadil. Hello, dear listeners. Welcome to the Infinite Library Podcast. I'm your host, Ben.
I'm a servant of the secret fire, wielder of the flame of Arnor, etc., etc., etc. Your host, John.
Yeah, and today we're starting our series on the Lord of the Rings. We're starting with this first episode, Fellowship of the Ring, and I thought I would just ask this icebreaker question, John, before we get started. What faction of the Lord of the Rings are you? It appears that you've already revealed your secret, which is that you're one of the Maiar or the angelic wizard beings, although you can also amend your answer. I'm just going to come out right in front of it, John. I can't be anything but a dwarf. I love drinking beer and hanging out with my bros underneath the mountain. And I also yearn for past glories, which are no longer the case.
Really, but I would have taken. I have always pictured you as a hobbit.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I can imagine you wearing like a waistcoat and smoking a big pipe. Enjoying many different kinds of pies and ales as you pat your belly. But I guess the alopecia kind of you'd be a very strange looking hobbit. Your feet would be so bare.
Yeah, they'd probably ask me to do some divination or something as a result of being so different. Although when you put it that way, hobbit's not bad. You can just kind of hang out and eat stuff and tell tales, which is kind of what I already do. So yeah.
Exactly. But I like to imagine you as like a dwarf, and you have to have like a fake beard that you put on.
Yeah, just reprising the David Ferry stuff from the Libra episode. Yeah, I'm if David Ferry was a dwarf. Yeah.
I of course am an elf.
I was going to say that. I figured. So
yeah, I love all that is beautiful in the world. I put my love for everything, for my land, my people, the world into everything I do, everything I make. But I have great sorrow for the passing of an age, and I have lived long and seen much, and I am so weary.
Yeah,
sorrow.
I was complaining to somebody that I found that post sort of irritating because the elves are always like, "Oh, it used to be beautiful, and our passing thing is gone." And at least with the dwarfs, it's like, "We made great works," like we're building things under the mountain. How great it is, So, but yeah,
there's something really interesting there, and not to like get us into the topic like initially, but I think that like that does like show the interesting way like Tolkien handles like immortality in his work, because the dwarves are, I mean, we don't have to get into like the deep lore on the dwarves, but like the dwarves kind of are this like weird like middle ground where they're not quite immortal, but they're also not quite mortal in the way like humans are in Lord of the Rings. And so they still kind of have like this very deep connection to like kin and like lineage. In a way, like the elves still care about who their parents are, but it's like, we were joking a little bit about like Elrond and his relationship to his dad as it's portrayed in this book. And, his dad's been dead for like 5,000 years or something.
Right.
And,
yeah.
It's one of those things where like that is like going like, that's going to affect your psychology. Like you just can't necessarily like think of lineage the same way when it's like your relatives are all just chilling in the Grey Havens.
Which we should talk about later, but I guess we should also officially start. So John, why you pitched this idea and I was immediately all in, but before we talk about our background with Tolkien, what was your thoughts behind having us read these three?
Yeah, so I have actually been wanting to like revisit these for quite some time, and obviously, if I can kind of sync up my reading for the show with just reading I want to do in general, that's always a big plus. But my kind of initial thought process on this was inspired by of all things, a post I read like a year ago from someone I followed who is kind of a like great books canon person. And he was reading Lord of the Rings.
Oh, nice. Okay.
And, he was saying, he posted something kind of along the lines of like, I'm enjoying it, but like, does it really measure up to like canonical works? And Speaking as someone who, again, does definitely fit a certain description of like a great books or like canon reader, um, that kind of like stuck in my craw a little bit
Yeah,
because I was
yeah.
like, I actually have trouble thinking of a piece of literature from like the last 100 years that is canonical if Lord of the Rings is not canonical. Now, again, this comes with all the typical Bloomian caveats. Like, canonical does not mean like stylistically unimpeachable or that like you can't have any criticisms. But in terms of like cultural power and like influence and kind of, yeah, the society wide like level of acclaim and, emotional resonance, I can't think of like almost any book that tops Lord of the Rings from the last 100 years. Like this spawned a genre that is still like one of the most popular in genre. Like there's a reason like people like most fantasy is still Tolkien knockoffs.
Yes, yeah, yeah.
And this book is nearly 100 years old, and people are still just writing bad pastiche of it and saying like that's a genre.
Yeah, you probably have better examples than me, but I remember even as a kid reading those horrible Aragon books and realizing that he was just doing like a Lord of the Rings knockoff, basically. So
Yeah, I can't defend those books, but like those never should have gotten published. He wrote those when he was like 13.
right.
And I guess they never got properly edited. So, but I totally get what you, I mean, there's a reason like there's still a ton of fantasy where it's like humans, elves, and dwarves, sometimes not hobbits because of the kind of very strange status of like Lord of the Rings copyright, where certain things are very widely available and some things are not. Uh, but maybe we can talk about that at some point because it is kind of strange in terms of the influence these books have had.
Yeah, so many people have read them, and also I think people who don't identify as readers have either read them or had some engagement with like the lore, whether it's through movies or video games or just again fantasy as a setting. And I think when you had asked me to do this, I thought back to how like, and again, this might be me misconstruing a memory, but I think I read the third book first, Return of the King, as like a child. And I remember thinking, oh, this is just like Star Wars. Because remember at the beginning of Star Wars, they allude to like, this is movie 4 in A New Hope. And I don't know if I finished Return of the King, but I remember opening it up and it's starting on page like 700. And that's when Gandalf and Pippin are riding to Minas Tirith. And I was just like, oh, we're already in the middle of it. Like, I have no idea what's going on. And eventually I read them and, put them together. And I think I was telling you before, I revisited them in undergrad because I got a nice collection of them in one book for a quarter, which I long since thought of as being all one thing, and they are one thing, but it's rare that you get them in like one volume. And I read them all through and found them great. And I was excited as this chance to revisit it because I feel like there is a lot more under the hood to Lord of the Rings than I think one might discern at first glance. And I think people's skepticism of Lord of the Rings, like your poster, as well as I hopefully get into Harold Bloom's incredibly cranky introduction to a collected edition that I found, where he becomes visibly bored with the idea of Lord of the Rings by the third paragraph. It's worth kind of talking about, like, yeah, I think there's a lot more going on. And I think for this podcast, we're interested in fantasy and genre and, canonicity. And I think these are a good example of someone that's like somehow doing both at the same time. So, yeah.
Well, yeah. And I think that there's also, one of the things I like my personal definition of what like makes a work canonical. It's like, is this a book that can be almost infinitely mined, like for thought? In the way that like, again, there are still people writing new and interesting takes on the plays of William Shakespeare, on Don Quixote. There are still people doing that with Lord of the Rings. Like I found out, as I was looking for a PDF of a book called like Politics and Society and Law, Government, and Society in JRR Tolkien's works, because I wanted to do some supplementary reading. And I found out there's no PDF because this is from like a small press that exclusively puts out scholarly works on J.R.R. Tolkien.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah.
So there is like a whole kind of like subset of Tolkien studies where people are coming to his extended universe, which I definitely want to talk a little bit about his approach to world building
Yes,
and
definitely.
the way that it really differs from how people tend to do it today, and especially about how a lot, compared to how a lot of people who are kind of working in imitation of him approach it. Because I think it is really key to like what makes these books so special. Yeah, so I'm really excited for this, Ben. Reading Fellowship was an absolute joy.
Yeah,
And I am
same.
like only more excited to continue on into the series.
Yeah, and one last thing I wanted to add before we maybe talk about Tolkien's background is I feel like the complaint that you get about Tolkien is that he describes the natural landscape too much. And as a note, I think just reading Fellowship, I was like, I actually really like that. And yeah, I feel like he doesn't describe it that too much. And also, I think it's very important to, as you were saying, his idea of lore. And so just as a note, I think, again, if you're out there listening and you're like, yeah, doesn't Tolkien spend a lot of time describing dales and forests? One, I think it's cool, but also two, I think there's a reason he's doing it, which we'll hopefully get into. So,
well, and also not just the landscape, but people also complain a lot about all the songs, which I definitely want to talk about the songs. There is something here in terms of like Tolkien as someone who like did a lot of work on poetry.
Yeah.
And I think maybe in some ways like was almost more interested in writing poetry than writing prose.
Yeah.
I think if there are some issues with like the style in this book, it very much kind of comes down to like being a poet and being very in love with like the sound of words
and like meter.
Yeah. And maybe kind of letting prose like become an excuse to lose that poet's touch for the for deftness and for like a quick phrase. Because a lot of the most beautiful passages from this book are A, some of the shortest, and B, or are from the poems or songs in the book, in my opinion, at least.
Yeah, I would agree. And I also feel like those are when you feel like lore being a thing that lives in the world comes into being, especially if people are repeating songs from a much older time. So.
Yeah. Well, I really like your thing about lore, because I think that something that's very important for Tolkien is this idea of like knowledge is, I don't want to say it's practical, but it's something that is lived.
Yes.
Like it is something that like exists in the, like, there's no computers, there's no magical like computer equivalent where people can like go, like there's no holocrons, like, and to go back to Star Wars, like you were talking about earlier, like there's nowhere like where they can just go and like find out everything they need to know. Like people know things.
Yeah.
People have written things down. One of my favorite bits in this book is where, Gandalf is describing how he figured out that the ring is the One Ring. And, he has like this kind of hunch, but he has to travel all the way to like Gondor to go to a library so that he can find the one scroll that this guy wrote like 5,000 years ago and read it. And he's like, fuck, yeah, no, now I know for sure.
Also, like Denethor, the king of Gondor, is like, you can look, but nobody's found anything. And then like, somehow he finds the one thing nobody's found, which was like an account that Isildur wrote about the ring, basically. So, yeah.
But I thought it was like his brother's journal. Anyway,
maybe it was his brother's journal. Yeah, but somebody's like was writing a little thing about what happened. So yeah.
Which I think I know we want to talk about Tolkien as a guy, because I do think that like his I'm always someone who kind of is always of two minds about like the biographical reading of a work. There is this part of me that does really want to take that very strict textualist, like we're going to look at the book, we're not going to like try to psychoanalyze like through the book, we're not going to we're just going to treat this text like as a thing that exists in the world and like take it on its own terms. But then sometimes you come across someone like J.R.R. Tolkien, who is, as I put it to you earlier, Ben, a weird guy.
Yeah.
Complimentary.
Yeah, not
Like
derogatory. Yeah.
a pretty singular personality. Like kind of this aristocratic, like ish, like gentry English Catholic. Like basically like raised from birth to be an Oxford philologist. Like spoke, 10 different languages because like his mom like started teaching him like Greek when he was like 4. Yeah, like literally like basically like eugenically bred to be like a philologist. um like goes off to World War I and like comes back and like can't, like, for I mean in the way that a lot of people couldn't, like could not like process that experience, like in a like could not like integrate that experience easily, and so he makes this. And it's and again, this book at the time it was put out was very singular. Like no one was doing stuff like there were antecedents in terms of fantasy fiction, but in terms of like telling a story this way and telling this type of story, like this owes a lot more to Beowulf and like medieval romance than it does to, say, the Gods of Pagana. um
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, or like I really doubt Tolkien ever read a word of like Conan, but that was fantasy fiction that was being written, semi contemporaneously.
Yeah, especially since too, like you just mentioned, yeah, he had substantial contributions to Beowulf scholarship. He was a philologist, which philologists had like I think more and much more rigorous intellectual clout back then in terms of comparing, like reading works of mythology or literature in the original languages, and then comparing the ways that the languages worked to each other. That's something that he was trained to do, and again, it allows him to like shift registers, to invent made up languages that are internally consistent and not just like making up words. Like he has the training to invent internally consistent languages. And then there's a part in one of his speeches on fairy stories, which I want to refer to. I think it was a lecture where he talks about how like philology and mythology go hand in hand. And so like you can't create a mythology without a linguistic system and vice versa. And so I think he, again, attempts to do that in this book. Whereas, yeah, something like Conan is just kind of like, what if there was like a really strong guy who was in like this weird, pre-history landscape? Like, what would it look like versus, oh, this tree was here for 1,000 years and we have stories about it that somebody who's older than me told me about. Like, that's the approach Lord of the Rings is taking. So,
well, I think like Lord of the Rings, for whatever you say about it, and this is not to denigrate pulp, but it's not pulp.
Yeah.
It's something else. Maybe that something else is a little pretentious or kind of highfalutin in its tone. I definitely think we're going to get to some criticisms of Tolkien here. Even criticisms that are rooted in things we enjoy about the work. I definitely have some thoughts about what you just said about kind of the way he uses language to illustrate culture and like ways of life. Because I feel like there is like a weakness there too in terms of maybe how he treats characters as a little perfunctory compared to like characters as being stand-ins for his various made-up cultures that he's very proud of.
Yeah, it's much more like synecdoche as opposed to like realistic psychology, and I think that's also, as you were just saying, something that's more medieval and
absolutely,
than modern.
There's a lot of telling rather than showing, but it's done in such a way that it does not feel as like clotting as it might in another thing. But I also think that one of the things I really do want to stress here is, yeah, Tolkien's like grounding in philology is so important. As someone who in another life would have loved to have been a philologist, had I grown up in a country where that was a discipline you could study. One of the strongest things in Tolkien for me is the fact that his names of places and people sound like names.
Yeah.
Like you hear Legolas, you hear Gimli, Like there's definitely a thing where if I hear particularly like made up fantasy names, but sometimes even names like from like places I don't know anything about. Like there's something like in the human brain where like your brain does not immediately capitalize that first letter and like be like, oh, that's a proper noun. That's a person's name.
Right. Yeah.
In this
Yeah.
way that with Tolkien, it always like, no, those names sound like names. There's definitely a huge problem I have with a lot of fantasy fiction is people do not think out what they call things nearly hard enough.
Right. Yeah.
There is way too much just jamming random syllables together and pretending that that is sufficient. And I get it. I've done that, and it's something that like when I look back at like stuff I wrote when I was in high school, it's like, why did I do that? Why did I think that was a good thing to call something?
Or like, calling a character like a percussive sound, like, oh, this guy's name is Thrak or something.
Yeah.
So,
but Tolkien, like he just has like the fact that Sauron and Saruman sound like very similar. They're on theoretically the same side, but you don't feel like that's weird.
yeah.
Because it just feels like a character, like having one character named Jack and one character named John, because they feel like real names.
Yeah, so there's a consistency to the phonemes and the way they're deployed in terms that's easy to follow. But that also leads to you could think about Tolkien's like Germanic and Anglo-Saxon bias in some of this world creation, which I don't necessarily think is a problem, but people love to point it out. But I think if you're working in a way that's internally consistent, you sort of can't help but draw upon that. And again, I don't think that's necessarily a problem, but people do like to point out the Beowulf like predilections for Germanic, Old English, that kind of stuff. That's definitely in here, but it's definitely not a prevalent strain. It's more like background notes or something to the world building he's doing.
Well, I think that if there is like a point where maybe I don't know if we can necessarily say this is a total critique, but again, one of the things about Tolkien, he's a very English figure.
Oh yeah.
We were joking earlier about like, did Tolkien ever meet an Italian guy? I really don't know. He obviously did go and like fight in the war, and that is a huge influence on this book. And I know we want to talk about the role like World War I kind of plays in this book. But he had the perspective of an Oxford professor of the like early 20th century. And I'm not necessarily saying I don't want to overplay that. I don't want to be like, oh, he was a completely contemptible racist or blah blah blah. But the world he lived in was a lot smaller than
definitely.
ours. He did not, even as like a scholar, like working in one of the foremost outposts of academia of his time, like the world was smaller. There was less that had been translated. There are only so many hours in the day. The man knew 10 languages, but a lot of those languages were languages that, were either dead or, fairly indigenous to the area he was working in. He maybe did not have like a strong enough grasp on Indian or Chinese or, other like more distant cultures that maybe today in fantasy people would want to have like a non-white culture, play a very prominent role, or a non-European culture, let me say. And he might just not have felt that he could do proper justice to because again, he clearly wants to, I mean, Lord of the Rings is not quite the kind of standard fantasy trope now where you just take a real world culture and you just change the name to something vaguely similar, and it's just like you just kind of read it and you're like, okay, these are the British people, these are the Italian people, these are the Chinese people, and you just kind of like let your stereotypes of those like fill in the gaps in your imagination. But there's definitely like an element where like Tolkien knew a lot about like the Anglo-Saxons. He knew a lot about English people of like the 1600s. He knew like a lot about like medieval knights and like British kind of Norman English like culture of like the high Middle Ages.
Yeah, courtly romance. Yeah.
He wanted to take the things he knew and he wanted to portray them in new and interesting ways rather than just kind of working in pastiche that's that broad. And there are places where he does do that. Like the Easterlings, are definitely a place where he's very weak in his world building.
Yeah, if you're not familiar with those, listener, that's the like elephant faction that shows up later in the Lord of the Rings
they're the
story.
bad brown people.
Yeah, the sort of exoticized other, we might say. But yeah.
And we can talk about that. That is definitely like a critique. But I think that in terms of what he's doing here, like he does not want to get over his skis, and at least I think he doesn't want to get over his skis, and he wants to make sure that like he is really doing the work in a way that he wants to with the stuff he thinks is really important.
Yeah. One last thing I did want to add about his World War I engagement, just before we move on. And to me, it's kind of like, again, you hear World War I, you hear traumatic encounter, but basically all of his friends died. And he was pressured into enlisting in World War I. And he saw, he was at the Battle of Somme, I think Somme. And, he had contracted, or wait, what is it? Sorry.
Battle of the Somme.
Battle of the Somme. Yeah, I know no French pronunciation, so Tolkien would probably kick me out of his philology class. So he got trench fever and was declared an invalid, and so he got shuffled around between hospitals and garrison duties. But his entire battalion was eventually wiped out when he wasn't there, and basically all of his friends were killed. And so he starts working on fantasy stories, basically as he's recovering. And he begins work on the Battle of Lost Tales and the something about the fall of Gondolin, just so almost as like a way of processing what happened. And I just want to note, like, if there's anything that we learned from, Delaney's Nova, it's that like novels sort of exist in relationship to their context of their production. Like they comment on the things that they're saying about when they were created. And, as you had mentioned, like, biographical readings are fun, but there's always a tendency to sort of reduce everything to like, oh, he was working out trauma, he was processing issues. But I think it's still something that's very much apparent here in terms of a lost world that happened before World War I that is now gone. And I think that's something that's there that I think you were discussing a little bit with the biographical reading. And again, like, I didn't quite realize the extent of like, it's like if my friends died and my entire battalion was wiped out, like I'd need to process what happened in some way. And so again, like while Lord of the Rings is, we could say a more like processed outgrowth from Fall of Gondolin, the stuff he starts working on, it's still, I think, in conversation with that. And so that's one thing I wanted to mention before we start is it's definitely there, even if we can't reduce the entire work to just, the world pre-World War I or something.
Why don't we do enough preamble and we'll actually get into the book, and let's talk about our prologue concerning hobbits. Ben, what do you know about hobbits?
Well, I know that they love to live in holes, but not dirty, nasty holes. Nice, clean holes that are big with lots of windows and stuff in them. I love that he basically gives you this sort of like, by the way, here are what hobbits are, because I don't have to necessarily like I talked about them in the book The Hobbit, but they're like their own people right now. And so here's everything you need to get up to speed. And I also love that this paratext, I think, starts like being like the book. Like, for instance, we're told that hobbits invented smoke and tobacco. They invented smoking loud, which like Pippin knows about, or no, Merry is described as being an expert on before we're even introduced to who Merry is. So when you're reading this intro, you're like, wait, what's going on? And so you basically get the full update on what hobbits are, as well as like the book to me even starts there. So
no, I mean, it's genuinely kind of a fascinating little like 15 pages, because like you said, like it does feel necessary. Like, I don't think that you could just drop us right into chapter one and not have the reader be totally confused, especially if you haven't read The Hobbit, which presumably a lot of people, when this book came out, had not, because The Hobbit, like Tolkien, like thought of as like a children's book, uh, despite kind of this being a sequel of sorts. I think this book is written to some degree with the assumption that you will have not read The Hobbit, or at least you might have not, and so this is important. But it is like we don't know who the writer here is. Is this Tolkien writing
Yeah.
as himself? Is this an academic, like, at some point in the future of Middle Earth? Who's compiling this?
Yeah, and they seem to know people in the story that we haven't been introduced yet, which is my favorite part. Like,
I don't think Frodo wrote this. I don't think Bilbo wrote this. So who did? I think that it's very funny that, again, Tolkien, being a professional academic, starts his book off with like an academic intro on the study of hobbits, and their culture and customs.
Yeah, which like immediately presents them, as like an object to be studied and have knowledge about, which you might not know, but if you read this, you'll get it. So
no, it is written in like an academic tone. Like, it is not working in like a storybook register in this first section, or even like an epic register. It is starting as like a parochial like ethnography of hobbits.
Right. Yeah.
And I there's enough here in terms of kind of grounding us in the setting of the Shire. We understand who hobbits are. We understand that there are different kinds of hobbits. We kind of get a bit of the history, not just of them, but of Middle Earth more broadly. We kind of understand that they have a very particular culture, that, if you're, what I'm looking for, if you're, if you're being a canny reader, you're like, oh, this is like kind of probably what Tolkien imagined English country life of like the generation previous to him was like. Like, I found myself thinking a bit of Middlemarch as we were reading about the Hobbits.
Oh man, what I wouldn't give for Middlemarch set in the Shire, where all of the problems are just like, oh, are they going to inherit this money? Like, oh, I need to make sure that Sam marries a nice lady because he's my gardener daughter. And there's just nothing that happens outside that. That would be so great.
So, or the SB is going to get Bag's End.
Yeah. Yeah, basically it's like, this is just Middlemarch in a nutshell, and then we just move on to more important stuff after that. So
so it's genuinely like, I really love this as an intro. And I think that it is interesting because something Tolkien, and I think we're going to get to this as we keep talking, but one thing that is really interesting about Tolkien is that he really resists the urge to do a certain type of exposition in this book.
Yeah.
He does not really like tell us a lot about like the metaphysics of the world, or he does not like do big aside, like there's almost no asides like in the narrator's voice about like the history of a place or the history of a specific person. Everything is told to us by the characters. So if someone tells us about a piece of history or about a place, they are going to say, I know this, I heard this, it is lore is something that is in a person. There is no like omniscient third person voice here who can tell us everything that's going on. The characters have to do it.
Yeah.
Even again in Concerning Hobbits, like, we don't know who the person writing it is, but it's a person
who's knowledgeable and knows lore.
Exactly. Yeah. It is an academic. It is not just like a third person narrator just kind of giving us this information kind of from like a godlike perspective. Something I found myself thinking about as I was reading this, is this essay totally accurate? Are there things that are being elided or that the author does not know about hobbits? I think that Tolkien is presumably someone who would have been aware of the shortcomings of academics. So it's something I found myself thinking about as I was reading it. But uh, it's fascinating that he chooses to start this book this way. There are appendixes later we'll probably talk about in another episode that do spell out a lot of stuff in a more kind of direct way, but it's not in the story except for this essay for the most part.
Yes, yeah, and we were talking earlier, but if you've read individual books, you've no doubt had the experience of being referred to the appendices or the footnotes, and then they're not in your current volume. And I think it's interesting that in this one, it's all contained more or less to the voice of the narrator or whoever is the person compiling this introduction. And so we get stuff about the Brandywine, we get stuff about Bilbo a little bit, so you know who he is before the story starts. And again, I think there's a version of this that where we didn't get the appendices, and it's just this kind of academic narrator. And I like that they're both, because I feel like they're both pretty academic, like appendices and that. But yeah, this is like it's sort of like an on ramp for this story, and it's funny that it's in an academic tone as opposed to like once upon a time there was a hobbit who lived in a hole, which is the opening tone of the book The Hobbit. It's much more like fairy story as opposed to academic. So
yeah, well, and even then we get to the beginning of the story proper. So concerning hobbits, this essay is our quote unquote prologue, which is an interesting thing to call that, because it's not necessarily what I would think of as when I think about writing a prologue. That's not what I think about writing.
Things that happen before the story. yeah.
But it's interesting. Again, we get into like this epic register eventually, but the book proper even does not quite start in that fear. Like it starts in almost, again, kind of this Middlemarchy register. Chapter 1, A Long Expected Party. When Mr. Bilbo Baggins of Bag End announced that he would shortly be celebrating his 111st birthday with a party of special magnificence, there was much talk and excitement in Hobbiton. There's a cutesiness there, but it's not quite Once Upon a Time. But it's also not quite Sing Goddess, The Wrath of Achilles, Peleus' son. We're in this kind of odd register, and I mean, I think there is something really fascinating in terms of the way that the hobbits are almost kind of this anachronism.
Yes, yeah.
They feel out of step with the rest of Middle Earth, and I think that's very deliberate on Tolkien's part.
They're out. We could say they're outside of history, even though they have their own history. It's their, and they keep we're told in the introduction that they avoid big men. They sort of keep to themselves. They don't. They're kind of suspicious of outsiders, but they'll still talk to you. But yeah, they're outside of the history of Middle Earth.
Yeah, and it's been like now. 1760 there for like 5,000 years.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Until this book. And I think, too, Tolkien really takes his time in these opening bits in giving us the world of the Shire before we have to leave it. And I like, too, that, we're told that Frodo every autumn feels like leaving, but he never does. And Bilbo, who is his uncle...
Yeah, his uncle.
His uncle has left and gone on a journey and brought back, trinkets and gold and a mysterious ring, which we'll get to. But he has traveled, and it's like Frodo wants to leave this Middlemarch, life, but he doesn't have the impetus yet. And so this party is kind of this great scene setting for this is what they'll be leaving behind when they go on the journey.
Yeah, you really feel like you understand what these characters are fighting for eventually. The hobbits in particular kind of, having a very different relationship to the world and to their society than some of the more epic in scale characters. But also you personally feel some of that heartache. Because you have Tolkien takes his time grounding you in this place in a way that Gondor feels like someplace like you can barely like wrap your head around because it is this like epic kingdom. But the Shire feels homey, even as someone who is like the opposite of someone who would live in the Shire. um,
Yeah, it's very parochial. It's very like middle class gentry, I think maybe.
yeah, I mean
Yeah.
well, at least like the Bagginses are gentry.
Yeah.
Bilbo is a gentleman in the very like old school sense of the term. He does not
Right.
work.
Yeah.
He has no job. He just does whatever he wants because he's living on. I mean, he's from the Bagginses are a wealthy family to begin with,
Right.
but he's living off the the fruits of his adventure, which is unique. I
Yeah.
almost wish we'd done an episode on The Hobbit because I do feel like there is. Man, I really would have liked to talk about that a bit more. But anyway.
Well, I like that you're pointing this out, John, because much like with Lord of the Rings, there's the implication of stories of the past and history that goes on in the previous eras that we're only getting glimpses of. And so it's fitting that we're kind of talking about the Hobbit as this is the pre-story. And it gets kind of like summarized in this opening bit. And importantly, the chapter labeled The Shadow of the Past, which I think is honestly incredible. Like, it might even be my favorite chapter in the whole book is chapter 2, because when we get the events of the party, it goes off kind of mysteriously. We may not do a whole plot summary because we assume that you listeners are familiar at least with the sketch of the plot. But in The Shadow of the Past, suddenly everything that happened in The Hobbit is reframed for Frodo by Gandalf. And the idea of that these things that happened in The Hobbit, which seemed kind of like mythical or fable-like, actually have extremely serious import in terms of like history occurring, like evil awakening, forces of men moving. And it all happens in this chapter to Frodo. And basically it becomes Frodo's responsibility to deal with it. And we get him like, I don't want to deal with this. I wish this never happened to me. And Gandalf's like, well, we have to do something about it. And so if there were intimations of leaving the Shire and being, like, I like the Shire, but I need to leave. When the Shadow of the Past chapter happens, it's like, history is happening and we're going to be taken away from here, whether we like it or not, basically. And I found that move to be incredibly powerful this time.
Yeah, something I want to talk about a little bit is Frodo, because I think that Frodo is. I mean, if there is a character in this book who actually feels like a developed, like, whole person, it's Frodo.
Right. Yeah.
I think that there is a weakness in a lot of fantasy writing, especially kind of this archetypical like hero's journey fantasy writing, where the hero is too eager because the author is too eager to get to the stuff they actually find exciting.
To start the story, yeah.
Yeah, it's like Luke Skywalker. Yeah, his aunt and uncle die, but he doesn't ever really seem to think about it ever again after he leaves Tatooine.
That's true. He doesn't. There's no time, really.
Yeah, no, exactly. The plot has to move too fast, and some of that's cinema versus a book.
Yeah,
and we can even maybe talk about the Lord of the Rings movies a little bit and the way that they have to compress things. But Frodo is ambivalent. When we first meet him, he's ambivalent. Like you said, Ben, he wants to leave. He wants to stay. It's something that, to me, as someone, who very much felt in that position at a certain point in my life, sometimes still feels in a similar position in my life. Should I stay? Should I go? The world out there is scary. Here is safe. But, I want something that's beyond what I know. That feels real. And, when it's thrust upon him, he would rather, let this cup pass for me.
Yeah.
But, he does what is necessary. And something I like about Frodo as a protagonist is he does what he has to, but even when he's seeing beautiful, amazing things, there is always a hint of melancholy there.
Yeah.
And I think that Sam also is actually very good at, I think if there's a second character who's like a fully developed person, it's Sam.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, Sam is a character I also can relate to a lot. You know, I think about that longing to like feel like you're in a story, to really like enter history in this particular way, but also finding that terrifying.
To finally see the elves too, because one of the subplots is he's like, oh, I wish I could finally see some elves, and then it actually happens. So yeah.
And then he kind of gradually realizes that, like, the elves are people, like just people. And you know, there's beauty in that. There's this recognition of like knowing fellow people as people, but there's also kind of this loss of innocence and this loss of enchantment with the world that is really striking. You know, something that I found that really struck me when I first read this book, because I had read a lot of fantasy before I actually got to reading Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
So I read The Hobbit when I was a little kid, and I enjoyed it, but then I tried to read Lord of the Rings, and it was just a little too advanced for like where I was. I couldn't appreciate it. Tolkien's writing style was just not quite what I needed at the time. The plot was just a little too heavy. You know, not an uncommon experience, I assume. But when I did finally read this, I had read a ton of like Tolkien derivative fantasy, you know, like your Aragons, your, you know, Dungeons, Dragonlance and Dungeons and Dragons, like Drizzt Do'Urden novels, stuff like that. Garbage, to put it, not to put too fine a point on it. And I picked this up and I read it, and it struck me the way that Tolkien uses time, particularly in this first book, and particularly in this first section of this first book. You know, we start off with Bilbo's party. He departs to go on his retirement. He leaves the ring for Frodo. Frodo gets the ring. Gandalf like gives him this whole spiel about how, you know, the dark forces are rising, da 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 da. And then 20 years pass.
Yes, Gandalf is gone for like 20 years after, again, we're told history is happening, and also history is happening to you, Frodo. And then literally 20 years pass. Yeah, so.
Yeah. And that's just like, I mean, he does kind of just let that 20 years pass in like a paragraph. It's not something that takes up a ton of space on the page, but that does do a lot in terms of, again, thinking about like who Frodo is. What is he giving up? He's not like a teen. He's not, you know, he's not your Luke Skywalker farm boy who's raring to go. You know, he is, I mean, I guess in Hobbit terms, he's like, you know, in his early 30s, basically, maybe. But he's someone who has an established life. He has a home. You know, there's a huge, so again, there's so much in this first part of the book about arranging affairs to go on this journey. There's such like a care for what that actually means that you can't just pack up and leave your house to like cross half the world and like not plan for it a lot. I mean, not at that point, he's not even planning on going all the way to Mount Doom. He's just supposed to go to Rivendell.
Right. He's just supposed to go to Rivendell, and he is telling everyone that he's actually moving, I think, to Bree, is it? Or
no, he's moving to Brandybuck.
Brandybuck, yeah. And so he's like,
he's moving in with his relations.
Yes, which is the cover story. And even that takes a lot of prep. But yeah, like it's not until the council chapter at Rivendell is it clear that he has to even do the quest, at which point we're like pretty well into this book. So yeah.
No, it's like the halfway point.
Yeah, it's the halfway point. Yeah. So,
you know, and I mean, I'm guessing, you know, you kind of, you figure that there's going to be more to it than that. Like, it's not like I can't imagine like reading this and being like, oh, I guess you know, oh yeah, Frodo's going to like give the ring to Gandalf and then, you know, he'll go back home and
right,
he won't matter anymore.
Yeah.
But you know, it's like it's really, I mean, it's really funny that like selling his house to his somewhat execrable relations the Sackville Bagginses takes up so much room in the book.
Horrible people. Yeah. So yeah.
Awful woman.
Yeah. Yeah.
Labella Sackville Baggins, one of the great harpies of modern literature.
Yeah, again, there could have been a version of this thing that's just like Middlemarch and like, yeah, horrible in-laws and getting your affairs in order. But he has to do all of this so that he can leave. And I think, like you were saying with time, it's like Tolkien really takes his time. He wants us to know these things. And Roger Sales wrote a really good book that I parsed for this, thanks to Harold Bloom's cranky introduction, where he talks about Frodo as an aspect of modern heroism. But he says in relation to time, Tolkien knows what he is doing. The hobbits are like us in their attitude toward the lore and mysteries of life outside their own province. They move provincially, clumsily, relating everything they see to what they know from life at home, as though their way of understanding the world, no matter how inadequate, was the only one they could possibly have. And so I think that's helpful for us too, because we don't know about this fantasy world. So we're very closely aligned to the hobbits in that way. And I think the time aspect really helps that stick. So yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, again, I'm just comparing this like other things I've read, and how, again, Tolkien does such a good job with kind of creating this sense of dread of, we know that, when we start off the book, it's like strange things are like being seen on the borders of the Shire.
Right. Yeah.
There's stuff happening out in the world, but it's vague. No one is quite sure what it means. We find out later, there are people who maybe kind of like the wise, capital W, are, right, have been watching for the signs of the Dark Lord's return, and they have, a slightly better idea of what's going on. But, there is this sense that it's like, oh, like Sauron isn't just like posted up, like immediately, like ready to go. Like there is a build up here.
Yeah.
And that kind of sense of time is so important to that, because especially as we get on and we find out kind of what is actually happening in the background, the fact that like there is like a like race against time almost in this plot, in terms of like, can they get to Mount Doom before the forces of Sauron are like adequately like together that they can catch them? It creates this really interesting tension. But the fact that like the Black Riders come through and like they're scary, but you get the, like, again, they're not ready to like invade the whole Shire yet.
Right. Yeah. It's just they're sending out agents to find the ring. Frodo also isn't told that the ring draws them until much later, and he almost despairs then, as if to say like, well, then there's no way I can complete this quest. And Gandalf says, well, don't fear, you have help. You rely on other people. And so that, like, this initial phase with the Black Riders, I mean, Frodo's even relying on like other hobbits, like Merry and Pippin and Sam. But like the party gets bigger as the circumstances get more dire, and that buildup, I think, is why it's such a good story.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I mean, there's a reason that like this game is basically the reason Dungeons and Dragons exists and is a fun thing to do.
Right. Yeah.
Again, we can discuss whether or not the impact that has had on the modern fantasy genre has been a good thing.
Well, I wanted to ask, do you know of any examples of like men on a mission stories? Because I feel like in movies, that's a very clear trope with like Seven Samurai and everybody seeing that and wanting to do it. But I was thinking about how like it's called the Fellowship of the Ring, and there's like the first fellowship, which is when they get to when they get up to Rivendell, then they get everyone on the party. But then by the end of this book, the fellowship is broken immediately. So it's like not even quite like a men on a mission story, but like you get that impression of it being huge and momentous, even if for the space of what happens, it's not that much.
That is something that's so interesting about this book, because you think of the Fellowship, even when you like think about kind of the after this book part, you still think of the Fellowship as those 9 guys. Tolkien does do a good job of making these characters like feel like they know and care about each other in like a very short span of time. And again, despite the fact that he does not do a ton of time like with them like talking about their feelings or like getting to know each other, it's very there's like a business. I mean, I think that this is probably where his like war service comes in, you know, kind of meeting people very quickly, like having to develop camaraderie with them, and you know, having that be very important, but also kind of having a certain distance because there is only so well you can get to know someone when you're busy.
Right, and I feel like all of that happens after they leave Rivendell, but before the Fellowship is broken at the end, where there's like the bonding scenes. That's when Legolas and Gimli get to know each other after like sort of thinking ill of the other person because of, I guess, long-standing factional conflicts, which aren't really gotten into detail. But I do love the enmity between the dwarves and the elves sort of resolved when Gimli sees how hot Galadriel is. But we'll get to that later. But yeah, I think again, the one thing I want to go back to too is like when you'd mentioned time, and I think the lore has a lot to do with it. And again, this is something that Sales pointed out that I was reading for as I was reading this, is that like the lore, as we already said in the intro, is something that people do. And so anytime, or like it's alive, it's not just set dressing or backdrop. And so like when they're stuck in a jam, they will remember lore. Aragorn Strider knows all the lore about where they are to help them get out of jams when they're being chased. And then when they, in Shadow of the Past and the Council chapter, lore is extremely important to figure out what they're going to do. They need to know the lore first before they make an action. And like, so people give big speeches in the Council chapter. And I think my first time reading it, it was very like the adults are talking. But now like these are my favorite parts because I know some of the background. And it's fun to see the lore intrude in these debates, as well as like there's an instance where Aragorn tells them, sings them a song about Beren and Beren's elf wife, whose name I'm forgetting. Elbereth, maybe?
No, Elbereth is one of the Valar.
Oh, one of the Valar. Okay. But Strider basically tells a story about a doomed relationship from the Second Age between a man and an elf. And we know that he's in love with Arwen because we've read this before. But there's like an added context to him basically telling a story about himself. But it's the story of Beren, and it's from the Silmarillion where they like get one of the jewels back from Morgoth, and a wolf kills one of them. It's really, really fantastic stuff, but it's just a story that Strider tells them to when they're waiting for the Black Riders to show up on Weathertop, and it helps Frodo like fight them. So like it has like the lore has like a purpose. It's not just like a proscenium backdrop that like characters stand in front of. And I think like the time aspect also like, to me, just imbues that with more weight. So
yeah, no, you know, I definitely agree with you, Ben. I think that when I think about what is different about the way like Tolkien handles lore, it is this thing where it feels like knowing about history or stories in real life, where you know you don't know like everything perfectly, you don't know everything like down to it, but like it's almost less about knowing the exact truth of it and knowing enough, knowing how it makes you feel, you know, the way that knowing about a particular instance in time can carry forward into the future. You know, the people's relationships to that in this book feel very real. In a way that I find, you know, some fantasy literature, like people say things and it's like they're just reading the Wikipedia article.
Right. Well, and also Sales says very briefly, about lore, he goes, the purpose is not to provide a riddle or a code or to encourage a reader to feel he must be more learned to understand, but to evoke a world we know has long since passed away, where naming is taken to be a matter of grave importance and where therefore all names are appropriate. And then later in a thing Sales says that I loved, he basically compares the songs and lore to quotations in The Wasteland by T.S. Eliot, where he says, we recall something we have heard but never really grasped, no matter how well we know the words themselves. So yeah, like as you were saying, like having a sense of why something is important, even if you don't know the Wikipedia entry for, say, Zirak Ziggle or something, one of the, you know, place names that we see in this book.
So yeah, you know, I like that. I think we're going to talk more about lore as we keep going, but I think we should also talk a little bit about one of the other interesting things Tolkien does here, which is kind of the opposite of lore, mystery. Because again, as we were kind of following the plot loosely here, we've departed the Shire, and guess who we're meeting then?
Your friend and mine.
It's time.
Yeah.
It's our guy.
It's a merry fellow himself, Tom Bombadil.
Tom Bombadillo. Oh, damn. Oh, fuck. His coat is blue. And guess what? Yeah, his fucking boots are yellow.
Yeah, he again, Tom Bombadil, one of the best characters, hands down. Anybody who hates Tom Bombadil, just get out right now.
Kill yourself.
Yeah, stop listening to this
will
podcast.
Not see heaven.
Yeah. Tom Bombadil is the man. The basically, I could read a whole book just about him. He's the best. So.
Yeah, when Ben and I were doing kind of our pre-show chatter over the week, at one point I sent him a thing where I was like, me when Tom Bombadil's in the scene. Oh yeah, oh fuck, it's Tom Bombadil. Me when Tom Bombadil is not in the scene. Oh, this fucking sucks. Where the fuck's Tom Bombadil? And that sums up my feelings.
Everyone should be asking, where's Tom Bombadil? And they even talk about him in the council chapter. But anyway, so the thing that's important about Tom Bombadil and might explain why he appears to stick out is that Tolkien basically translated him from a poem into this portion of the book. He wrote a poem about Tom Bombadil, Old Man Willow, which almost kills the hobbits, and the fucking Barrow-wights, which never show up again. This is all lore of a poem that he had wrote that he basically just puts into the story as like the first dangerous encounter, heroic saving by Tom Bombadil, and then getting to hang out with Tom Bombadil at his house. That structure is like repeated again later, but it appears first in this bit.
Well, I really like this scene, because, Tom Bombadil, like the one guy in Middle-earth who fucks.
He fucks, he's got swag, and he can sing.
Dick swinging past his knees, 5-tool player of Arda, the coolest motherfucker to ever live.
He's also a lore master, we're told, so he knows the lore. Yeah.
He knows everything.
Yeah.
He's omniscient, omnipotent. But guess what? He has ADHD, so he can't do shit. Love his wife.
Yeah, the River daughter. He loves her. So.
A fucking Goldberry, the hottest lady in Middle Earth.
Yeah, in the council, they're even like, why don't we give the ring to Tom Bombadil? And they're like, he has ADHD. He'd probably forget it.
We'll get to that. We'll get to that.
Okay, yeah.
I don't want to let's not get too over our skis here. But I really, I love this section. And it's a section that I think a lot of people, particularly people who like maybe read these books after watching the movies, find baffling. Like for those of you who are just movie watchers, like there's a bit where like a fucking like living tree monster, like basically like the trees from the Wizard of Oz.
Yes.
Like tries to eat like the hobbits basically.
Yeah, by making them fall asleep and then like absorbing them. Then
Tom Bombadil, who is this kind of just incredibly strange, like very fey figure.
Yes, extremely so.
He's really described, his description really struck me this time because he's taller than the hobbits, but he's shorter than a human.
Yeah.
So he kind of is already occupying this kind of weird middle ground where he does not really fit in with any of the types of people we know exist in this world. He just comes in, he's singing, he's almost always singing.
And he's picking flowers.
Is actually very important.
Yes. Yeah.
And he's just singing, he's improv. Like he's just singing a song about what he's doing, which guess what? He's fetching water lilies for his hot ass wife.
Yeah. Tom Bombadil is the wife guy we all aspire to be. So yeah.
And I like this section so much because I think it's an incredibly effective bridge between the Shire and kind of, again, the more epic tone that we enter after departing from Bree. Where we kind of enter almost like a hobbity, like as in the Hobbit style, like tone, like we are on an adventure now, but things aren't too dangerous. In fact, God is here to keep us safe and tuck us in bed and
tell us a story, give us a nice meal, and sing to us. Well, he's like the spirit of the forest. He's from an older age, but he's still powerful. Yeah.
So I was about to say, one of the things that I also really appreciate about this part, Tom Bombadil is a mystery.
Yeah.
Tolkien never totally explains what he is. There's a ton of theorizing about who he is. Some people think he's literally like capital G God. Some people, like you said, Ben, think he's some kind of like genius loci, like spirit of the forest. I think he's just a cool guy. But yeah, like he's existed like since the beginning of time, apparently, and will presumably like outlast everything else in the world.
Which is crazy to think about.
Later that like if Sauron wins, like the 2 square miles of forest that Tom Bombadil like thinks of as his property will be the last place to fall. So he's incredibly powerful, but you know, it I guess this is kind of where I get into like Tolkien as a Catholic being interesting, because, you know, again, Ben, you and I both went to Catholic school.
Yeah.
You know, Catholics do love their lore, their philosophy, their calculating how many angels can dance on the head of a pin, but they also love their mystery.
Right.
And I think that really comes out here. You know, it's really cool. You know, at one point, Frodo shows Tom the ring, because at this point, he's the only one who, well, him and Sam are the only two who know about the ring.
Yes. Yeah.
And Sam isn't supposed to know about the ring. So, right. You know, he doesn't know if he should tell Merry and Pippin about why they're actually doing this. You know, he's feeling the burden of the ring. And he gives it to Tom, and Tom's just like, he looks through it, and like, you know, so all of a sudden we kind of have not a deflating of what's happening. You know, Tom taking the ring and kind of being like, this is, what the fuck, who fucking cares?
Well, if Frodo even puts it on and Tom Bombadil's like, I can see you, because the ring turns you invisible, and Tom Bombadil's like, stop, you know, I can see you, my eyes still work, like put that away or something. Like, yeah, but
you know, it's this thing of Tolkien acknowledging like there's bigger stuff. There's stuff that is outside of this story.
Yeah.
The entire world does not, in fact, revolve around this plot, even if this plot does have the fate of the world, like in its, or at least the fate of Middle Earth, you know, in its scope.
Yeah.
In this way that feels very powerful. You know, again, I think that when I think about what makes this book feel so different, is this sense of, in a way, like bagginess, like the fact that Tolkien is not concerned with like telling the story in the most like efficient, like action-packed way possible. Like he really wants to take time, like you said, to describe the landscape, to visit with this character he invented in a silly poem, you know, some years previously, and that I think really does like make the world feel much realer. There's a reason people are so obsessed with picking apart the lore of Middle Earth, and it's because there are gaps, there are places to explore and think about in a way that I think a lot of world building today does not. You know, kind of this, what I think was like Wikipedia, like world building, where like everything is just about like filling out a Wikipedia. Of your world, and like not having ambiguity, not having these mysteries, these places where, you know, there's shadows of something larger. And I think that Tolkien really, does something really special here with Tom. And I mean, I understand like why it's not in the movies, because I feel like it's a lot harder to illustrate this stuff in a movie, because film just demands like a certain level of tightness that
realism
does not. But it's a bummer. I want to see Tom.
I think if you wanted to do it, I think you would have to change the visual style, because I feel like the tone of this section is consistent in that, like, you remember there's that phrase where it's before they get to Tom Bombadil and the narrative perspective goes inside the head of a fox, and the fox goes, Hobbits walking about, that's weird. And I don't think it ever does that ever again. And I feel like the tone of that kind of playful kind of like fable mystery adventure where the stakes are high but not too high, like it's all consistent. So like I feel like if you're going to represent this, like you would need to have like Tom Bombadil be like animated so that it's like
I was literally about to say the same thing.
Yeah, he's just like a cartoon animation and they're all real actors, because that would like capture the kind of tone shift. Well, it's not really it's more just like this chunk is tonally a little more playful, and then it gets serious as the thing advances. So yeah. Yeah, just imagining Who Framed Roger Rabbit, but it's just Tom Bombadil and Goldberry just helping out real life hobbits. So yeah.
Yeah, it's a fascinating section. Like it's again probably one of my favorite parts of the book.
I also wanted to add the Barrow Wights are also about like kingdoms of men long since gone, and I think that applies to the Tom Bombadil thing. But
well, no, the Barrow Wights are also, I think, really interesting because they are like an evil that is totally unrelated to this broader. Like they do not work for Sauron. They are not. I think it's actually one of the places where Tolkien maybe is able to kind of think a little more about like evil, not I don't want to say like necessarily a realistic way, but it's this much more human like vision of evil. It's not Morgoth, it's not Sauron. It's like, oh yeah, these were shitty guys who died, and like they're like shittiness has just kind of infected the world around them.
Yeah, and they want more people to kill to keep them alive. So like I totally agree with what you're saying, John. It makes the world feel bigger that there's this like system of order or events that don't have a direct bearing on what's going on, but they still help to convey the hobbits through this journey from like danger to safety. So
no, for sure. And I think we still kind of see a little of that, even though the setting obviously changes a great deal when they get to Bree, and all of a sudden we're almost in like kind of a noir-y setting in a way.
Noir. New Bree City or something.
Again, maybe the movie's kind of getting in my way a little bit, but it's like you feel like you're in this like dark urban environment suddenly. I mean, Bree isn't a city. I think it's probably supposed to be like a small town, but compared to the Shire, it feels big. And suddenly we have big people. We have men. And even then, we're still it's still a bridge. There are hobbits in Bree. And it's not like this kind of thing where it's like, oh, the hobbits hate the men and the men hate the hobbits. Like they all kind of live together in more or less harmony. But it feels like we're in the real world. Oh, go ahead.
Well, and like people can wish us ill. If the Shire is just like gossips, it's like in Bree, it's like somebody could rat you out to the Black Riders. Like there's danger there. So
like in the Shire, you never feel like, even if like Lobella Sackville Baggins like got asked where Frodo was by the Black Riders, she would be like, I don't want to talk to you.
Right.
You look weird. I don't want to deal with you. Whereas Bree, it's like, oh yeah, someone would sell you out like in a heartbeat if the wrong person knows who you are. And we kind of get this sense of like what traveling incognito, Frodo's going by an assumed name. There's so much stuff in this section about like identity and names. Really personified with Aragorn.
Yes. Yeah.
Or as we know him right now, Strider. Where again, it's like you meet this guy and like he seems kind of sketchy. It's like he's really the first human we've seen. I mean, I guess at this point, if you don't know better, like Gandalf, you don't know that Gandalf isn't technically human.
Right.
But Aragorn is like the first like normal person we've seen, or like normal human we've seen, and you don't know if you can trust him. And it's only later when we learn a little more about him and we kind of see that he has these layers of identity that we come to see him as like a full character.
And his identity has to be confirmed by the letter that the owner of the inn that they're at, is it the Prancing Pony?
Indeed it is.
Yeah, it has to he forgot to give the letter to Frodo to post it to the Shire. It's from Gandalf, and it confirms, who Strider is. And I like, too, that Strider is Aragorn, but he's one of the line of men from Numenor, which we're not told what Numenor is, but the idea is like, that's like nobility. That's like the best guys. If you get into the lore, Numenors, like they lived longer. They were like man's answer to elves.
Atlanteans.
Yeah, exactly. And so we're told that like he's one of them and he has a part to play at the end here.
Like you said, Tony Soprano voice. You ever feel like you're coming in at the end of something?
I don't know why I've got end of history on the brain, but there's something like, it's like, I could have been a ranger. Like I could have been one of the Numenor men, and instead I'm here.
Dunedain.
Now there was a king, Gil-galad, tall, fair.
His soul was sharp, his lance was keen.
He was an elf, Gil-galad? yeah. Just
I could have seen the light of the two trees.
Would have been beautiful. Oh, yeah.
Maro.
Yeah. Just fucking Tony Soprano, Lord of the Rings, just realizing that all the good stuff has already happened.
See, that's the secret. So, there's kind of this stuff where it's like, oh, well, Tolkien's kind of racist with how he does like the Easterlings. Just imagine them as Italian.
Yeah, just hey, yo. I gotta
yo.
Yeah.
I'm walking
fucking take this elephant over here. Yeah. Just saying I'm walking here. Yeah.
Sauron, the boss of bosses.
He's trying to get the ring back. Yeah.
Hey, you never take a Don's ring. I want to talk more about that, like that sense of ending, that sense of coming in at the end of something, because there is something there, obviously. That's a huge theme in this book. I don't quite know if we have like all the pieces yet to maybe talk about that.
I don't know if we do yet. So, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, crucial piece of the puzzle here. Like you said, Ben, we kind of have our party coming together now. And again, Aragorn is a character I have a lot of kind of mixed feelings about, because there is this way where he almost like becomes less real to me as the book goes on. Like Strider feels like a realer character to me than Aragorn, son of Arathorn, does. Does that make sense? What is it?
The king who will be, even though we don't know that yet. Yeah. So
there's this element where like you meet Aragorn or you meet Strider, and he is like a dirty guy.
Yeah, he's a dirty guy. He's good at concealing. Him and Sam have a great rapport where Sam doesn't trust him, and he's just like, all right, and he smokes. Yeah. So
he is, he's very at home in this kind of again kind of almost noirish setting of Bree. This quote unquote like real world.
Right.
And then as we leave, and there are these interesting points where there's like a turn.
Yeah.
Like at this point in the book, he is Strider. Even after we know his real name is Aragorn, the narrative does not start referring to him as such yet.
Right.
There's a point in the book where it turns, where Frodo looks at him and sees that the person he knew as Strider is, in fact, this noble person, this prince, this king.
In Lothlorien when he does that, or is it earlier?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. I think that there is a point where that happens in Lothlorien.
Yeah.
I think that the narrative starts to refer to him as Aragorn versus Strider when they get to Rivendell.
Right. Yeah.
Don't quote me on that, but I think that is what happens.
Yeah, that sounds right. And I think when he learns his name is Aragorn, when they're in Bree, he stands up like taller, and suddenly they're like, "Whoa, okay, this guy has layers."
It's like the council. It's when he is like, "Oh, I have this role to play in this quest. I am not like a functional character. I am a main character. I have the sword. It needs to get reforged." Yeah, and we're gonna. Yeah,
I have my own quest I need to fulfill besides the main one. Yeah,
yeah. So. But even then, he says to Frodo, like, I beg to be your companion once again. Frodo, son of Drogo, and there is this way in which he still feels like very human at that point. In this way that, like, as the epic scope of the book takes over, he starts to feel more and more. I mean, there's a nice way to put it and a mean way to put it. I could say archetypical. I could also say wooden.
Wooden, yeah. Well, it's a good that you brought that up, though, because one of the criticisms I think we could talk about with Tolkien is that Sales talks about how he kind of is only good at things that he's created, like hobbits and elves and dwarves. But when he gets to men, he starts talking about them the way he hears about men written about in stories, like the archetypal quality, the Aragorn as the prodigal son or the man who would be king. And I think like that stiffness is also what Harold Bloom identifies as one of the reasons that he hates it. And if I could just have a quick bit from Harold Bloom about that stiffness, because it's, I think, apropos with this. But there is still the burden of Tolkien's style, stiff, false, archaic, overwrought, and finally a real hindrance in Volume 3, which we're not talking about. But and then Bloom says at one point when he's reading a bit from Return of the King, I'm not able to understand how a skilled and mature reader can absorb about 1,500 pages of this quaint stuff. Sometimes reading Tolkien, I'm reminded of the Book of Mormon. So basically Bloom being a crank, which is why we love him. But I think that stiffness kind of comes apparent a little bit in Aragorn. And I think he sort of is like an archetypical character, even if I can't think of a story before this that has like the prodigal son, the man who would be king in it. So.
Yeah, I mean, there are obviously antecedents to him in literature. I mean, he's kind of an Arthur figure in a way.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, there is definitely something there where it feels like Tolkien kind of needs him to play his role, and that's not even necessarily a bad thing. I think it's kind of intentional in a way. I think the question is maybe like, who's the real Aragorn? It's kind of that classic, who is it, Bruce Wayne or Batman?
Right.
Is Strider the real Aragorn, this kind of wry, goofy, or not goofy, but, wry, earthier character? Is that the real person? Or is, the king who will be, is that the real him?
Yeah.
Or is it, is it both? Is it neither? Maybe that's something we can think about as we go on, because I do think that Aragorn is one of the only characters who does have this kind of like layers to his identity. Everyone else is a lot more straightforward.
Yeah,
they are who they say they are. Legolas is the elf. Gimli is the dwarf.
Yeah.
Boromir is the man in a way that even Aragorn isn't.
And without getting into Boromir, I feel like Boromir gets the short end of the stick in his presentation, which we can talk about that later. But I feel like compared to Aragorn, he's really second fiddle. So, yeah.
Yeah. I have feelings about that, too, because I understand what happens from like a story mechanics standpoint, but there is like an element where it kind of feels like Tolkien's just kind of like, oh, the ring made him crazy.
Well, also he's like, I've got this horn that I use to sound the alert, and then he's in Rivendell, he blows the horn immediately, and everyone's like, what the hell's going on? And they're just like all right, cool it, Buster. Like basically, like yeah.
There's definitely an element that Boromir definitely feels like the character where Tolkien's maybe his trouble with kind of portraying like characters with like an inner world feels the most egregious, because like you can't do temptation if you don't have a character who has like an inner life.
Yeah, we're just showed him like he has a queer look in his eye. He keeps like looking at Frodo and muttering.
And it kind of comes out of nowhere. Like it's something, again, we're told the ring does this. The ring tempts people, but none of the other members of the Fellowship have been tempted that we know of.
Right.
Galadriel is briefly tempted, but kind of immediately manages to overcome the temptation, which, hey, I mean, she's Galadriel. She's basically, a goddess of some kind. Fair enough. But, it's one of these things where it does feel like a point where Boromir is a fun character. He's, like you said, there's kind of this like silly side to him where he shows up and he blows the horn immediately. There's a reason he's the guy that we do the meme of. You could not just simply walk into Mordor. There's a reason that's him, and it's not Aragorn saying that.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, he's also like kind of, I think, like shorter than Aragorn and more like solid.
Well, he's not Numenorean.
That's true.
He's not the blood of the Dunedain.
Yeah.
He is a more ordinary man, and so he is fallible. And again, this way that feels very Catholic.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
You know, it's like, yeah, he's human. He's tempted to sin, but there's not a lot of psychological realism to like, why does he want the ring? What does he think he's going to do with it? I mean, some of that comes down to the fact that what having the ring actually does can get a little vague.
Yeah. Look, can we talk about the ring? I feel like we should.
I was about to say, like, we have not talked like hardly a whit about the ring, and the ring is the thing.
Yeah, the ring's the thing. But let's talk about the ring, because there's something about the ring that's worth talking about, as well as you just said, John, the fact that the powers of the ring are not exactly specified. So all we're told about the ring is that it is the One Ring. Sauron really wants it so that he can assume complete power. If you put the One Ring on, you turn invisible. No one can see you except like Sauron denizens, like the Black Riders. And, you know, when the ring is hot, it reveals the script. Now, the thing about the ring that I find most interesting on this read through is its similarity between the invisible ring from Plato's The Republic, which nobody can say if Tolkien was definitely thinking about it. But it's, to me, really one of those like lines of like fiction and philosophy intersecting, because in Plato's Republic, Socrates is in this dialogue with Glaucon, where he's basically arguing that justice is good in and itself and provides good things like individual security and prosperity. And Glaucon wants Plato to basically support this argument. And Glaucon's perspective, before he posits the idea of an invisible ring, is that we only do good things to each other because we've agreed upon it. And it's a contract that I agree to not hurt you so that we can both benefit. And that me agreeing not to hurt you has no intrinsic value in itself. And in order to illustrate this, Glaucon imagines a ring that turns you invisible. And as soon as you get the ring,
Glaucon.
Okay, sorry. Glaucon. Thank you, John. We always need somebody to fix mispronunciation.
You're French and you Frenched your Greek.
Yeah. Glaucon basically is like, imagine there's a ring that turns you invisible. Wouldn't everybody just use it to commit crimes all the time? Because they can commit crimes without the appearance of that. And even if Tolkien was not, consciously riffing on this, the idea that when you put on the ring and your true nature is revealed to you, and all of the powerful people realize, like, I have the power to do these things, I could use them for good, even though we know it's bad. Where it was with Frodo's temptation is, since he doesn't have as quite a lot of power level, he's more able to manage the temptation of the ring. But I like the idea of the ring, like, you sort of forego the social contract and you're able to indulge in your worst appetite, which is sort of the argument Glaucon is making in The Republic. And Socrates ends up arguing against it, whose particulars I don't remember. But the idea of like an invisible ring being able to, you could forget the social contract, you can do what you want to do. That's the thing that's bad, because, Galadriel would become just as bad as Sauron. Gandalf would also become just as bad. Boromir thinks we can use it to defeat Sauron, even though that would be bad. And it's only Frodo who's able to manage this temptation because he's, again, this isn't exactly explained, but we're told he's basically like good of heart. He has courage. He's part of the social contract. So I don't know. It's like one of those ideas that doesn't quite fit. Like he didn't just clearly pluck it from Plato and put it in his story, but there's some weird parallels between the two.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can assume that as a, again, like Oxford professor of his day who spoke, ancient Greek, Tolkien read The Republic.
Right.
Certainly.
Probably in the original Greek, we would think. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm sure he was familiar with this. Obviously, there are other antecedents to the ring in kind of the broader literature he was working in, Draupnir, Odin's magic ring from Norse mythology, Wagner's ring, which, is also based on Odin's Draupnir, but is different. The ring is a potent symbol. And, I agree with you, Ben. The invisibility kind of, it's one of these things that it feels so special about this book. one of the things that does drive me crazy with a lot of fantasy fiction is kind of the way that like the power levels get so out of control that like you can't appreciate anything. And like a ring of invisibility in like D&D at this point, that's like a like mid-level magic item.
Yeah, you get it from a drop from like a boss. Yeah,
yeah, exactly. Like, it's nice to have, like, sure, it can help in certain situations, but like it's not one of the big guns.
Right.
And you get the impression, again, if one of these more powerful characters got the ring, they would have the knowledge to use its power in different ways. Again, ways that are never described to us. The magic is always left very vague. But, presumably Gandalf would know how to use the ring in a way that Frodo does not.
Right.
But yeah, invisibility is this kind of keyword for this kind of license to act as you personally desire with no regard for other people. Even the first time we see the ring used in the book, Bilbo uses it to play a very funny but also like somewhat mean-spirited prank on his party guests when he disappears so that he can like thumb his nose at Hobbiton one more time before he leaves for his retirement. Which is, overall a fairly anodyne use of this, but it is, again, it's this way of cutting himself off from the greater community,
right? Yeah.
In this very direct way, and that is like a stand-in for what the ring means. It is the license to do as you will with no regard for others or for the world at large.
Right.
And that is really powerful. And, the thing that with Frodo that is, again, interesting is, like you said, Ben, he is good of heart, but he's good of heart in an ordinary way. Again, Galadriel, Gandalf, these are also characters who are quote unquote good. In fact, maybe we could even posit that they are like capital G, like ontologically good.
White hat.
Frodo is simply a good person. He's not supernaturally good, but he's also not powerful enough for the ring to be a temptation in that way. There's a bit later where after he offers the ring to Galadriel, he asks her like, basically like, is this all the ring can do? Like, is there something I'm missing here? Like, I feel like there should be more to it than just me turning invisible. And Galadriel is like, yeah, you could do more with it if you learned and became more powerful.
Yeah.
But don't do that.
Right. Yeah.
Like if you do that, you will be tempted to use the ring to its full potential. And at that point, like all is lost.
Yeah, because you're imposing your will on the world as opposed to being a part of your social environment. And I think too, like you just said, the more powerful you are, the greater the temptation is. But Frodo is a modern, ordinary person, we might say, even though he's a hobbit. So yes, he experiences temptation, but he's not. There's not this like will to power almost or something like that.
Yeah. Well, I think that again, the reason Frodo resonates is that Frodo is good in a way that theoretically anyone can be good.
Yeah.
We can't all be Gandalf. We can't all be Galadriel. We can't all be Elrond. But theoretically anyone can be Frodo, or everyone can be Sam. It's like there are levels here. And again, I think that this goes back to like, World War I, frankly, this kind of this first like mass military mobilization, as horrific as it was this place where I think Tolkien probably saw a lot of bravery and a lot of heroism from people who maybe didn't even know what they were fighting for, who were not like from classically like military backgrounds, who were farmers or bakers or whatever, back home in England, but now, we're fighting for, their friends, for this certain conception of the world. Again, I don't want to go too far. Like, I think Tolkien actually does come down to a certain point, not as a pacifist, but like, I don't know if Tolkien was like, oh yeah, it was good we did World War I. I think he was probably like, it's good we beat the Germans, but like, it would have been better if none of it had ever happened.
Right. Yeah. We would not have lost the world that we had. Yeah.
Yeah. But, I think that it's it is this place where, again, maybe there is kind of like a sentimental aspect to it at some point. Maybe it is a little bit too optimistic in a way. But again, it feels very in line with like Tolkien's like kind of humanist Catholic streak
Yeah.
that I appreciate.
And also Catholic in the idea of like struggling against temptation, which Frodo has to do, and which the other characters have to do, at least in the moment where the ring is presented. So.
No, because there is a moment, and this is something that I did watch the movie, and I know we're trying to avoid getting too into the movie, but there's the bit in the book where when they're in Bree, and he does like the cow jumped over the moon song, and then he kind of does like a little spin on the same prank Bilbo did, where he just disappears in the middle of the inn, and like everyone's like, and they skipped that in the book in the movie, and I was like, how did they skip that? That is like the moment where like Frodo is tempted in a way because he thinks he is not taking his burden seriously.
And multiple characters tell him afterwards, you shouldn't have done that. like multiple people are like, now our position is worse because of what happened. Yeah. So,
yeah. I mean, I think that it's the movie being very resistant to doing all Tolkien's little song and dance numbers.
Yeah, which is funny that fucking the director was forced to put all the song and dance numbers in the horrible Hobbit adaptations.
Yeah, just because they needed more stuff to fill time because they had to take a like 200-page book and make it into 3 2-hour-long movies.
God,
a travesty.
Yeah, it doesn't bear thinking about. Yeah. So. Yeah, but I don't know. The ring is great because, again, not specified. You sort of immediately get what it is, but it's not explained how the ring could help you become all powerful, as well as the relationship between the various rings and how if you're wearing the one ring, you control the other rings. You know, you're just told it happens. Don't worry about it. We're not going to make sure this happens. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I remember again reading this as a kid for the first time and again kind of finding myself a little not vibing with it. Like this the council was around the time I kind of like was like, I don't know that I'm quite vibing with this, which in retrospect I don't understand exactly how I felt about that, but you know, again, it is what it is. Sometimes you're just not ready for something. But you know, I remember kind of finding the way Tolkien did magic to be a little bit alienating. I wanted big, flashy descriptions of laser beams flying out of people's fingers, and you know, I wanted big stuff. And Tolkien resists that. I mean, there's a lot of magic, but it's in the background. It's out of focus. There are very well-defined rules he had in mind somehow, but he never describes them to us because we are never in the shoes of someone who knows those things. You know, magic is very subtle. It is this thing that feels like quasi-divine, like and not again, like not in a D&D way where it's just like, oh, divine magic versus arcane magic is like just this kind of coat of paint you put on like a number of different effects, and like, oh, divine magic's better at healing, but you know, arcane magic's better at throwing fireballs and doing damage to stuff, and has better utility spells. You know, it's like Galadriel, you know, I know we're going to get to Lothlorien, but I think that Lothlorien is the section where you can see this the best. Like, it is an enchanted realm in this very like archetypical way. And you find out that it at least is in large part due to the fact that Galadriel is like an incredibly powerful in like a very like indeterminate way, like just because she is so old and has some level of power that she has developed somehow. Again, we don't know how. And the fact that she is the bearer of one of the 3 elven rings. You know, she is kind of the one who is enchanting this realm in this particular way. Rivendell the same, with Elrond having one of the rings. We find out Gandalf has the last of the elven rings, and that's part of why he is even, you know, more substantial than any of the other wizards in this way. But again, we never find out how. We never find out the mechanics of it. And I think that's great. Like that is how I want magic to feel. I read like, anymore if I like read something like in a Brandon Sanderson-y kind of vein of fantasy. At a certain point, I feel like I always feel like I'm reading anime.
Right. Yeah.
Because like, have you read JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, Ben?
I've heard of it. I have not.
Okay. So JoJo's, JoJo's is like the best version of this, where it is still like crazy and off the wall, but it's very much kind of this thing of like you set up like fake physics.
Right.
You have two people who have like very well-defined powers, and then you put them in a room and you let them fight each other.
Don't they say like album titles is like their attacks? Like they're it's like the title
a lot of the
album.
stands are named after like classic rock albums.
Yeah, which is awesome. Yeah,
it's awesome. You should definitely read JoJo's.
Okay, yeah.
Maybe we should do an episode on an arc of JoJo's. That'd be fun. You basically, it's like you kind of like set up this like arcane physics experiment, and you just kind of like watch like how these two like very well-defined power sets like just kind of bounce off each other. A lot of comic books also kind of work on a similar thing. And that's, again, that can be a lot of fun, but it doesn't feel like magic to me. It might feel like superpowers. It might feel like,
it's sort of like a science experiment or something.
Yeah, exactly. There's no transcendent quality to it. There's not this promise of like this bigger thing in like this, again, very mystical, like big other sense. Not like, oh, there's a bigger world, but like, no, there's something like that transcends the world, and magic is an expression of that. That's what I want magic to feel like, and that's what I think Tolkien does so well in this book. Like, magic is this thing that the mechanics are never clear. Presumably it has something to do with the metaphysics of this world, which we can learn more about. We can learn about Eru Iluvatar, the music of the Ainur, the Secret Fire, the Valar, etc. But even then, like even with that knowledge, we still don't know what magic is.
Right. There's still that mystery element, like you were talking about.
Exactly. And that's so good. It feels so powerful, and it makes the world feel so much more interesting because there's mystery, because there's things that are not going to be spelled out for us, and we can only imagine. There was a part of me that when I was thinking about rereading this, because I remembered from reading this in the past, this feeling of like, what does the ring actually do?
Right. Yeah.
Why is it such a big fucking deal? And there is, again, that is at some level, I don't want to say it's a totally unfair criticism. It is vague. It is left mysterious, but it's left mysterious in this tantalizing way, not in a vague way.
Right.
It's this way of you find yourself thinking about, okay, what would it mean? Again, it makes you think about like the symbolic register that the ring is working in. It's not a straightforward allegory exactly. Tolkien is a good writer, unlike his compatriot C.S. Lewis, who was a hack and a fraud, and just did base allegory for babies. The ring is not just like, so, license to do as you will, but that is what it does for you. So you have to think about, what would Gandalf look like with that much power? What would Galadriel look like with that much power? What would it mean to have a queen, beautiful and terrible as the dawn? What would it mean for everyone to love her and despair?
Yeah. It would be great. Yeah. It would be great. Well, so I think it's also worth mentioning in the fairy story lecture, he says that fairy stories provide recovery, escape, and consolation. And I think those aspects are a lot more powerful than just allegory, where it's just like, okay, I get what the message is. Yeah. And like in fantasy, in mystery, Tolkien wants you to return to the real world and see it anew. He wants to offer an escapism that isn't just like, delusion, but rather like getting outside of your frame of reference. And then consolation, I think, is where the World War I stuff comes in, where it's like, yeah, you can recover the lost world. You can, attempt to be true to yourself. Like, those are aspects that this mysteriousness offers. An allegory is just like, here's the message, here's the didacticism, here's what you're supposed to take away. So
have you read much C.S. Lewis, Ben?
So I read Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and then I read the first one where they accidentally wake up the evil wizard lady in the garden, and I remember thinking, like, I'm done with this series. Like, so I did look it up later because I was curious, and I haven't retained any of it. So
a couple of years ago, I read Till We Had Faces, which is one of his like non-children's books. And you finish that book and you know exactly what everything meant. It feels like you read a lecture.
Yeah.
Lord of the Rings does not feel like that. There are, again, ways in which I read this book and it made me think about, again, all the crazy stuff we're going through in the world right now. But I didn't feel like I was being lectured to. I didn't feel like I was being told how I'm supposed to feel or like what exactly I'm supposed to do.
Right.
There's a broadness here. There's an expansiveness to what it's doing where I did come away from this book feeling consoled in a way, because if the Fellowship can do their job, hopefully, that means that I can find the strength to do something good in the world we live in.
Yeah.
I didn't feel like I got a lecture on Tolkien's thoughts on theology, even though that's like in the background and like it's important in a broader sense to think about, but this book is not a lecture.
Yeah. And I mean, as Gandalf even says to Frodo, he's like, I wish, this wasn't happening. I wish the ring hadn't come to me. And Gandalf was like, I wish the same thing, but all that really matters is the time and what you're going to do with the time that's given to you. So, which I think, again, is a great, like a humanist message, we might say, if it's not explicitly religious, it's about making the best of your situation. So,
yeah, I think that if there is like a message I really have taken away from this book, and I think probably will be what I take from the books going forward, despair is the enemy.
Yes.
You can feel sad, you can mourn, you can be angry, but giving up is the real like loss, the real death. Yeah. Okay. Feel like we got very heavy there for a minute.
We did.
Are we ready to, I think it's maybe time to leave book one behind. I think we can.
Yeah.
We've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about the ring. Let's get to the council and getting our ding dang fellowship together.
Thank you for listening to The Infinite Library. If you liked our show, we hope you'll subscribe and leave us a review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or the podcast app of your choice. It helps us a lot. If you want to follow us on social media, we can be found on Twitter, Instagram, and Blue Sky at Infinite Library Pod. If you'd like to contact our team directly with episode ideas or feedback, you can email us at infinitelibrarypod@gmail.com. Our intro music is by Amos Legend in the Forest of Mayhem. Our outro music is by DJ Daggy Diggs, and our logo is created by Lars Noir.